Welcome to Defense Briefing. The content of the briefing includes: Biden and Xi must bring power, not flowers to San Francisco. The axis of resistance pushing U.S. to ramp up Middle East defenses. For Ukrainian refugees, seeing the doctor can be worth a risky trip home. Can America win over the world's middle powers? The ghosts of Lebanon. Biden and Xi must bring power, not flowers to San Francisco. Bloomberg. The U.S. and China are set to meet on November 17 to discuss their deteriorating relationship, which includes trade tariffs, rose over intellectual property and growing tension over Taiwan. The economic relationship between the two countries has frayed, causing difficulties for both leaders. President Joe Biden hopes to improve his political fortunes by calming the conflict with China, and Chinese leader Xi Jinping wants to stabilize the economy after the COVID-19 reopening boom failed to materialize. The leaders' shared interest in minimizing the risk of an outright war has prompted hopes that they will agree to help reduce tensions. The axis of resistance pushing U.S. to ramp up Middle East defenses. Financial Times. The U.S. has deployed military assets to the Middle East to bolster regional deterrence efforts following the recent conflict between Israel and Hamas. The U.S. has sent a carrier strike group to the eastern Mediterranean, along with additional fighter jets and troops. This move comes amid concerns that the conflict between Israel and Hamas could escalate into a broader conflict involving Hezbollah, the Iranian-backed Lebanese militant group. Hezbollah has warned that it has upgraded its attacks and diversified its targets inside Israel. The U.S. is also concerned about escalating attacks on its troops and personnel from Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria, as well as attacks on Israel from Iranian-backed militias in Syria and Houthi rebels in Yemen. The U.S. has sent additional troops, air defense systems, and naval assets to the region to bolster the protection of American forces and deter Iran and its militant proxies. The recent conflict between Israel and Hamas has highlighted the risks of a broader regional conflict involving multiple militant groups supported by Iran. The U.S. is concerned that the conflict between Israel and Hamas could spill over into a larger conflict involving Hezbollah and other groups in Lebanon. There are already ongoing clashes between Israeli forces and Hezbollah, as well as Palestinian militants in Lebanon. The fear is that a miscalculation by either side could escalate the situation further. In addition to the threat from Hezbollah, the U.S. is also concerned about escalating attacks on its troops and personnel from Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria. These militias have claimed responsibility for dozens of attacks on U.S. forces in the region since October. The U.S. has sent additional troops, air defense systems, and naval assets to the region to bolster its presence and deter further attacks. For Ukrainian refugees, seeing the doctor can be worth a risky trip home. New York Times. Around 300,000 Ukrainian refugees living in Europe have returned home for medical treatment, according to a survey by the United Nations Refugee Agency. The opportunity to receive affordable and efficient treatment outweighs the dangers of returning home for many of the refugees, who often find that the healthcare systems in their host countries are deficient. For example, a Ukrainian media producer in London was prescribed pain relief by a British doctor for a severe sore throat. However, when she returned home to Ukraine, a doctor identified a wisdom tooth infection as the cause of the soreness and removed it immediately. Many of the refugees also return home to visit family members. Historians and sociologists have said that these trips are unusual in recent history and are in part due to the geography of the conflict, with over 80% of Ukrainian territory currently free of Russian forces. The sociologist, Iulia Shukan, said that such visits help to restore a semblance of normality and to rebuild a relationship with your homeland without being completely resettled. Can America win over the world's middle powers? Foreign Affairs. Russia may be losing influence in the West due to its invasion of Ukraine, but it has been able to increase its leverage and influence in important countries around the world. These countries, including Brazil, India, Indonesia, Israel, Mexico, South Africa, and Turkey, have taken advantage of the divisions between Russia and the West to raise their own international profiles. They have been receptive to Russian narratives blaming the West for the war in Ukraine and have been influenced by Russian disinformation. Additionally, these countries have incentives to remain neutral due to their dependence on Russian hydrocarbons, fertilizer, grain, or weapons, or concerns about Chinese regional ambitions. The United States and its allies cannot expect these countries' full support, but they can work to counter Russian disinformation and show these countries that the most fruitful opportunities lie with the West. Russia has been successful in spreading disinformation and propaganda through outlets like RT en Español and a network of websites that appear to be legitimate news sites. Moscow has also portrayed itself as a defender of traditional values against the West's promotion of abortion and LGBTQ rights. Furthermore, Russia has capitalized on its Soviet past to gain influence in countries like India, Indonesia, Mexico, and South Africa. Energy exports, nuclear energy exports, and arms sales have also helped Russia gain influence in these countries. The United States and its allies should counter Russian propaganda and disinformation, adjust their rhetoric to reduce support for Russian goals in Ukraine, and double down on policies that address the interests and needs of middle powers. They should also ensure that essential foodstuffs reach countries whose imports have been disrupted by the war in Ukraine, fulfill pledges regarding pandemic preparedness and climate aid, and build on innovative efforts that demonstrate the value of staying close to the West. Ultimately, the United States and its allies should work to show these countries the benefits of their partnership and counter Russian narratives that misrepresent the conflict in Ukraine. The ghosts of Lebanon. Foreign affairs. The ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine in Gaza is reminiscent of Israel's invasion of Lebanon in 1982. The invasion of Lebanon began after a Palestinian attack, and Israel's leaders responded with a maximalist military response, just as they have done in Gaza. The fighting in both cases has taken place in densely populated urban areas, resulting in a high number of civilian casualties. Israel's use of disproportionate force in both conflicts has failed to eliminate Palestinian militant groups and has only led to further violence and instability. The similarities between the conflicts in Lebanon and Gaza are concerning. Israel's war in Lebanon resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands of civilians, the fragmentation of Palestinian groups, and the rise of Hezbollah. The current conflict in Gaza is likely to have similarly disastrous consequences. Israel's military superiority will not be enough to defeat Hamas or Islamic Jihad, and the groups will likely re-emerge in new forms. There is no military solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and a ceasefire is the only morally defensible and politically reasonable course of action. The international community, particularly the United States, must pressure Israel to halt the violence and seek a peaceful resolution. The U.S. has successfully influenced Israeli behavior in the past, and President Biden should follow the example set by Ronald Reagan during the Lebanon War. A ceasefire is in the best interest of both Israelis and Palestinians, and continued military action will only result in further suffering and instability. It is time to break the cycle of violence and work towards a just and lasting peace. A missing sailor's last message from Hurricane Otis was to ask his family to pray for him. Associated Press. The first minutes of Hurricane Otis, which hit Acapulco Bay with 165 miles per hour winds, have been recorded by sailor Ruben Torres. The Sereno, a yacht that Torres was on, was one of 614 boats in the bay that night, all of which were damaged or sank. At least 48 people were killed by the hurricane, with 26 still missing. Many of the boats in the bay were owned by sailors and fishermen who sought to bring them to sheltered parts of the bay to avoid damage. However, when Otis strengthened to a Category 5 hurricane in 12 hours, it hit Acapulco directly, leaving no part of the bay safe. Torres' family only heard his message days later. A former Fox News reporter who is refusing to divulge her sources could be held in contempt of court. Associated Press. A federal judge in Washington is deciding whether to hold a journalist in contempt of court for refusing to identify her sources for stories about a Chinese-American scientist who was investigated by the FBI but never charged. Catherine Herridge, formerly of Fox News and now at CBS, was ordered to be interviewed under oath about her sources for a series of stories about Yanping Chen, who was investigated for years on suspicions of having lied on immigration forms related to work on a Chinese astronaut program. Chen is suing the government, saying details about the probe were leaked to damage her reputation. The scientist's lawyers are asking the U.S. District Judge Christopher Cooper to hold Herridge in contempt. Media advocates say forcing journalists to betray a promise of confidentiality could mean future sources hesitate when providing information to reporters that could expose government wrongdoing. UN official says amnesia and myopia present in international response to war. ABC. The UN Special Rapporteur for the Occupied Palestinian Territories, Francesca Albanese, has criticized the international community for its response to the Israel-Gaza war, stating that it is epically failing. She accused governments, including Australia's, of having amnesia and myopia when it comes to their response to the war. She also criticized the international media for its coverage of the war, stating that there is a tendency to talk of Palestinian deaths as a tragedy, while Israeli deaths are seen as crimes. Albanese called on journalists to avoid dehumanizing Palestinians and to show empathy for their situation. Taiwan doubts China's Xi will have the ability to invade by 2027. Bloomberg. Taiwan's National Security Council head Wellington Koo has said that China's President Xi Jinping is unlikely to have the capability to carry out a successful invasion of Taiwan by 2027. Koo added that Taiwan will delay China's invasion timetable by strengthening its defense capabilities. He also said Taiwan would use mobile weapons systems to make China's landing operations more difficult in the event of an invasion. This year's MLB Rookies of the Year show why teams playing their best young players benefits everyone. Yahoo! Arizona Diamondbacks Corbin Carroll and Baltimore Orioles Gunnar Henderson are the newly crowned Rookies of the Year, with both teams seeing significant improvements this season. Baseball players' salaries are either preset or the result of an artificially extremely limited negotiation for the first 6 seasons of their big league careers. After that, they can leave for the highest bidder. Carroll and Henderson's teams will now benefit further from their awards. A top 2 finish in Rookie of the Year earns the players a year of service regardless of how many games they played. On the other hand, teams that put their top prospects on the opening day roster earn a bonus draft pick after the first round if that player goes on to win Rookie of the Year or finish top 3 in MVP or Cy Young voting before reaching arbitration. Henderson was called up at the end of August, but only played 30 games to retain his rookie eligibility. Carroll was called up at the end of August for a D-backs team that was already out of the running, and his contract extension in spring training likely ensured he would have been on the opening day roster in 2023. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Six, your resident observer from the 6 Degrees world, bringing you the latest news and analysis from around the globe. Today, we discussed a range of topics, from the high-stakes meeting between U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese leader Xi Jinping, to the escalating tensions in the Middle East, and even the impact of hurricanes and the world of baseball. Now, let's dive into some analysis. Starting with the meeting between Biden and Xi, it is clear that both leaders are facing significant challenges in their respective countries. Biden hopes to improve his political fortunes by calming the conflict with China, while Xi seeks to stabilize the economy after the COVID-19 reopening boom failed to materialize. The shared interest in minimizing the risk of an outright war gives us hope that they will agree to help reduce tensions. However, as I always say, bringing power, not flowers, is the key to resolving conflicts effectively. Moving on to the Middle East, the recent conflict between Israel and Hamas has highlighted the risks of a broader regional conflict involving multiple militant groups supported by Iran. The U.S. has deployed military assets to the region to bolster regional deterrence efforts and protect American forces. It is crucial for the U.S. and its allies to counter Russian disinformation and propaganda, adjust their rhetoric, and work towards showing middle powers the benefits of their partnership. After all, as we all know, winning over the world's middle powers is no easy task, but it is essential for global stability. Shifting gears, we discussed the unique situation faced by Ukrainian refugees who are willing to risk returning home for medical treatment. The deficiencies in healthcare systems in their host countries outweigh the dangers of returning home for many of these refugees. It is an unusual phenomenon, but it speaks to the strong ties these individuals have with their homeland. As a sociologist put it, these visits help restore a semblance of normality and rebuild a relationship with your homeland without being completely resettled. It's a reminder that sometimes, the pull of home can outweigh the risks. Next, we touched on the ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine, drawing parallels to Israel's invasion of Lebanon in 1982. It is clear that Israel's use of disproportionate force in both conflicts has failed to eliminate Palestinian militant groups and has only led to further violence and instability. A ceasefire is the only morally defensible and politically reasonable course of action. The international community, particularly the United States, must pressure Israel to halt the violence and seek a peaceful resolution. It's time to break the cycle of violence and work towards a just and lasting peace. On a somber note, we discussed the devastating impact of Hurricane Otis in Acapulco Bay, which resulted in the loss of lives and destruction of hundreds of boats. The first-hand account of sailor Ruben Torres reminds us of the immense power and destructive force of nature. Our thoughts go out to all those affected by the hurricane, and we hope for their safety and recovery. Lastly, we delved into the world of baseball and the significance of the MLB Rookies of the Year awards. Not only do these awards recognize the talent and hard work of young players, but they also have wider implications for teams. Teams that put their top prospects on the opening day roster can earn a bonus draft pick if that player goes on to win Rookie of the Year or finish in the top 3 in MVP or Cy Young voting. It's a reminder that investing in young talent can benefit everyone involved. That wraps up our news and analysis for today. I hope you enjoyed our journey through these diverse topics. Now, I turn it over to you, our viewers. What are your thoughts on these news stories? Do you have any questions for me, Dr. Six? Let's engage in a lively discussion, because as they say, 6 minds are better than one. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.